Hello and welcome in. I hope that everybody can hear me. I don't know if you can or not, but this is my first live and I'm sure that it'll be a little confusing for me at times. But I just wanted to introduce myself to start. Um, Let me see here, get my notes up here. Of course, all my notes just disappeared as I was trying to fight with StreamYard. So just a little introduction of myself. I think I have too many windows open. There's a reason why I usually have like 5 monitors at work going. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to get myself organized here. I thought I had everything up and split the way I needed it, but I guess not. So anyway, tonight I want to just introduce myself mainly, and I want to go through some of the complaints. Um, well, actually, I'm not going to really cover the complaint for the Sumner County, because that one's a little different than the one with the Department of Children's Services. But just to let you know who I am not an attorney. I do have a legal background. Much like the general public, I have found parts of this case and the coverage surrounding it to be extremely confusing. Um, so one thing that I have found along the way is that I'm continuously asking a lot of questions and trying to put patterns together. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows that I am not actually accusing Seth of anything. Um, I'm not accusing Katie and Chris of anything. I just want to go through these complaints and get an understanding of what they are actually about. So I came into this case with Sebastian Rogers kind of late after Sebastian had already been missing for approximately 6 months. And that was around the time that At Night and Dog the Bounty Hunter became involved. So I briefly looked into who At Night was, and that was a little alarming. But I was not paying very much attention to the people surrounding Seth at that point. I was primarily trying to find a reliable information about Sebastian and understand the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. So, how I found the online coverage is I was actually watching mob crews coverage for other missing persons cases. I had watched replays of his coverage of like Aiden Clune and Dylan Rounds, and I remember him mentioning that people wanted him to cover Sebastian's case. And I believe he may have covered Sebastian a little before that, but stopped because there had not been much movement in the case. So the first Sebastian related coverage I remember watching was when he began putting together the videos about the reported 3 a.m. lights. At first, I didn't pay attention to the live chat because I just wasn't into the whole, true crime community. I didn't understand the dynamics of it. I was just watching it for information. So, after hearing him mention a few times that, there's a lot of drama surrounding this case and he didn't want to become involved in it and he just kind of ignored it. But after like the third time, I thought, I'm going to look in this chat and see what's happening. And holy cow, I was not prepared for it. That was when I realized how deeply divided this online community had become. So I didn't know the creators, the teams, the alliances, or the history behind the arguments, and I came into this relatively blind. So in hindsight, it's probably helpful because I did not begin with loyalty to any creator or side or parent. I initially found the Green Team channels largely because some of them were reviewing documents and discussing records. Most of what I heard during that period was supportive of Seth, of course, because it was Green Team, and very critical of Katie and Chris. So that naturally influenced my first impression. And then the RICO litigation happened along with all the surrounding disputes. And it took me several months to begin sorting out what was actually going on. Now, being a paralegal, when I saw that RICO case, I thought this is not adding up to me. So that's when I really started looking into at night who these people are, the history of them. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So, so I began, eventually hearing claims that were so outrageous or unsupported that I could simply not accept them. I mean, the suggestion that that Proudfoot's brought alligators into their backyard, and one could have eaten Sebastian is just, once you've insulted my intelligence, I'm gone. That's just the way it is. So, I did not begin listening to other perspectives because I turned against Seth or decided that Chris and Katie were innocent or guilty of anything. I did it because I needed to neutralize my own thinking. And I can't respect Sebastian or look at this fairly if I begin by deciding which adult to defend. So, what I found difficult was the community seemed so divided that many people had already chosen a side, while others were so careful about remaining neutral that they sometimes avoided addressing things that clearly deserved questions. And I do not believe neutrality means ignoring inconsistencies. I believe it means applying the same level of scrutiny to everyone. And I tend to notice patterns and ask why. Like, for example, like the truck, the lights video. They're saying, well, it was a trash truck, or no, it was just a truck. Well, you don't have to show me what it is, but show me what it's not. And that's why I was like, well, why are they not showing us that it was not flashlights? Show us that truck, but they don't. So that is the kind of thing where I really get wrapped up into asking the why and trying to find I find answers through asking why and actually looking for what's missing. I mean, that's a lot of the answers come through what you don't have. So what I am and am not trying to do, I'm not claiming that I know what happened to Sebastian. I don't know why Sebastian is missing, and I don't know who was responsible for it. I don't know if he ran away, if he was kidnapped. I don't know anything. I'm not claiming to know, but what I'm trying to understand is the available documents and timelines and the public statements and the inconsistencies. And I will share my observations and opinions, and I may also discuss theories, which I probably will. I'm going to get into the September 22 CPS report and my theory, because it took me a couple of weeks of reading it and to try to figure out what it was actually all about and why it didn't make sense. No, I mean, it's written in a way that just makes no sense at all. But then Seth said something on his live on July 31st, and it took a couple of days for that to percolate. And then I started asking myself more questions, and I kind of came up with a theory. It all of a sudden connected, and I don't know if I'm correct, but it's the only thing that really makes sense in my mind anyway. So people are free to disagree with my interpretations. It's just my thoughts and, some of the things that I've seen. Um, so I actually, kind of got caught up in a rabbit hole. And what I want really for people to understand with these complaints is that it's not, the rumors on the street is, it's Seth. Seth wants to know what Sumner County has and what kind of evidence they have and what their investigation entails. And he also is claiming that, of course, DCS didn't tell him what he needed to know and didn't give him all the information that he should have had. And, that's not what these cases are about. They are truly about some questions that we'll kind of cover them here. The questions that each lawsuit is really asking, that's Sumner County. DCS lawsuit is, did DCS properly investigate the reports? Did DCS fail to notify or involve Seth, which he claims? What I'm finding is that Seth claims that a lot. I know that one of my visceral reactions a while ago was, are you a victim or are you a volunteer? because you just keep hearing, I didn't know, they didn't tell me. And after a while, it kind of makes me wonder how much effort he actually put into knowing. I'm going to check here. Are you guys able to hear me? I'm going to check in with you on Kick, Grandma. Let me know if you can hear me or not. I just sent you a message. Um, okay, great. So anyway, yeah, I feel like I'm rambling to myself, and talking to my screen with nobody's talking back at me, which is weird. So tonight I want to primarily focus on the DCS complaint, some of the questions, observations that stood out to me. This will really be an introduction because there's so much more to cover, and I'm telling you, I created a spreadsheet and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I've actually looked into a lot of there's a lot of acronyms in here in Hokey Pete. We have the CPIT and the FAST assessment. And then I actually went and found the policies for DCS because what I noticed in this complaint for DCS is that they didn't ask or they didn't explain what policies were actually being violated, which is what also will lead to some confusion. Is if the readers, you're looking at this and you're like, well, okay, so they didn't tell Seth this or that. Well, where's the policy that says they have to? And that's where this lawsuit actually lives. It lives in the federal court. And this is not about criminal, this is not about negligence per se. This is a federal civil rights claim. So it has a different threshold. It's, so from all the details that are in there, there are details in there that we should not know. It never should have been put in there. I'm actually fairly disgusted that this attorney put it in there. It has no bearing whatsoever on this lawsuit as far as the details of what we know what happened to Sebastian. I actually redacted the complaint just to be able to read it because it's so disgusting to me. But that's just me. I'm very sensitive about that. I didn't go through that trauma, but I'm very sensitive to that type of language. And it's not something that we should be seeing in a complaint. You can attach documents to the complaints or to, motion to dismiss or whatever. You can actually, let me see, it says hard to hear. Let's see if I can get this to turn up a little bit. Okay, let me know if that's better. Can you hear me a little bit better now? Okay. Let's see, where was I? So, we also have the Sumner County complaint for another discussion. I'm not going to dive into that. But, like I said, these are civil rights complaints, so there's a lot of details in here that we shouldn't even know. And for Sebastian's dignity, we should not know. What we will find, and I'll tell you, when it comes to the Sumner County complaint, the rumors are, that Seth wants to know what they have, and they cannot, obviously, because there's an ongoing investigation, they can't give Seth all of the information that they have, but they can. Seth, it could be a challenge for him, but they use the terminology upon information and belief, and that's going to be the key in that case. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but not later, but in a different life. But what the complaint is and it is not. So this is not a judicial finding. A complaint just tells the plaintiff's version of the case. It identifies the defendants. It doesn't prove that any of this even happened. Those things will start coming out once the motion to dismiss is filed. It will be. It's just kind of pretty standard as to what the process. Everybody files a motion to dismiss. And obviously the court hasn't made any decisions yet. You will probably see that motion to dismiss, sometime soon, I would think. I believe that they do it before they do the scheduling conference, which is in November. So they have, last I saw, they didn't even answer it yet. So we should be seeing some movement on that pretty soon. But some of these allegations, may be based on records that we haven't seen. It may be just inferences or pleaded upon, like I said, upon information and belief, which means, we think that this happened and we're relying on you, defendant, to give us proof as to whether or not it happened, because you are in possession of that evidence or of that exhibit that we need. So that's the key. And that will kind of help explain, what their angle will most likely be on that. So basically, filing a complaint gets your claims through the courthouse door, and it doesn't mean that the judge has agreed with them by any means. Even if they accept it, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just part of the process. So I don't really know how to get into this without sounding crude, because I don't want to dismiss anything that Sebastian has gone through, and I don't want to disrespect what's happening here. I mean, it's horrible that he's missing, and we definitely need to bring Sebastian home. So one of the confusing things that I was struggling with is that in the complaint, I believe there's 2 different places where it actually indicates that Seth was spoken to by DCS regarding the September 2022 complaint. And then in another place in the complaint, it says that they did not speak to him, they didn't contact him, he had no knowledge of it. So that was actually confusing in itself, because you're contradicting your own complaint in a different, just in a different paragraph. And so, of course, me and my spreadsheet, I have the whole thing all written out, where all the discrepancies are. But the core allegations in this complaint, and now we have to understand there's actually 2 plaintiffs. This is not only Seth. This is Seth and this is Sebastian. Seth is suing on behalf of Sebastian. So, like the core allegations is, on Sebastian's part, is that, that he, let me see here. Oh, I got myself screwed up. That DCS knew that Sebastian was highly vulnerable, and they knew of the abuse history and documented danger and left them there anyway. Now that's, that claim belongs to Sebastian. Another one is DCS gained full actual knowledge through their first investigation, which I'll get back to that. The second investigation, which is also Sebastian's, allegedly documented actual abuse but was closed. And then DCS's own records allegedly showed imminent removal risk, which is that 4E. Let's see, there's another, there's a couple other things in here that are called like special relationship and deliberate indifference. That's kind of like they knew that there was a problem, but they just kind of, didn't take it that seriously and left him there. So Seth's claims are that, failure to notify or interview Seth. We've been hearing that for, well, I've been probably 23 months I've been hearing that. Deprivation of Seth's parental rights. Failure to train and supervise. Now that's for both of them. Negligence, that's both of them. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now that one is mostly Seth. So in this complaint, there are 2 DCS reports. And here, I'm going to Okay, so Sassy Hans, did we lose her? um, can everybody, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Yeah, like I said, this is my first rodeo here, so if I'm afraid to even touch a button, you never know what's gonna happen. Things get a little wild. All right, let me open this up so I can read it to you a little bit, um, so I can see it a little bit better. Okay, so Tony's explanation of events, and this is what he said. I took it right from the transcript. So, in September 2022, Tony says, DCS reports begin in 2022. Seth allegedly knows nothing about them. Now, the complaint says, alleges first DCS investigation began after September 2022, or 28, 2022, sexual abuse report. Complaint also alleges Seth was never notified. Now, here we go. We have a big gap, and now this is Tony and Seth's story, remember. So, October 2022, Chris and Katie allegedly asked Seth to have Sebastian move to Clarksville. The plan is online school plus living with Seth. Now, the complaint does not discuss this conversation. And then he says, fall of 2022, Seth applies for Clarksville online school, and there was a waiting list delays, and the complaint doesn't mention that either. November 2022, parents continue discussing future plans. Well, the complaint documents DCS investigation closing in November, but no discussion of these so-called future plans. Early 2023, now this is how Tony described it, Sebastian remains on online school waiting list in Clarksville. The complaint doesn't mention it. So here we go. Finally, May 2023, Tony doesn't focus on this date other than saying DCS activity continued. And then the complaint alleges that, that's the second DCS report that they have in there. So then he says, summer to fall of 2023, behavior allegedly worsens and parents begin reconsidering placement options. November 2023. Well, of course, the complaint references worsening behavioral but does not discuss the family planning. Now, I find it interesting that all of these things in here that are in red were not mentioned in the complaint. Because then, if that was mentioned in the complaint, then we would know. If we didn't hear Tony's version of this, then we would know by reading the complaint that there was a lot of discussion about going to live with Seth, right? Late November 2023, Seth contacts behavioral specialist and receives 4 residential recommendations. The complaint silent. December 1st, Seth forwards recommendations to Chris and Katie. Complaint silent. Early December 2023, facilities deemed too expensive. Everyone allegedly returns to original plan for Sebastian to move to Seth's after school ends. The complaint silent. First or second week of December 2023, Clarksville online school approval finally comes through after about 14-month wait. The complaint silent. That's a problem, because we have all of these things, these conversations that were happening, but the only thing we're mentioning in this complaint are those 2 DCS reports. End of January, early February, the 5th, now they say there's 5, right? And we're only hearing about 2, and that's why I did this research to try to figure out what we're missing. The 5th DCS report allegedly open. Seth cannot obtain it because the investigation remains open. The complaint references the 2 earlier DCS investigations and later in March 2024 DCS safety assessments. It does not allege 5 reports. So why is this complaint not mentioning where are the other, if one of them is after he disappeared, okay. So there's 2. Now we have 2 that are missing. And then the rest of these, the things that he says is, basically after he disappeared, which would be that 5th report. So once I was, reviewing this, and I started to go down this rabbit hole. And one of the things that really caught me in the complaint was that, like, Katie's response to why DCS was getting a hold of her in, October. I think by the time they got a hold of her was maybe beginning of October, end of September. So then I started to kind of look at, what are we missing here? What am I missing? Because I'm not really understanding why this isn't making sense, and why Seth is saying, and one hand, keeps saying that he didn't know about these DCS reports, but yet I'm reading in the complaint that he did. So I'm going to play the video. Hopefully it comes through. Hopefully you can hear it. From when he did his Q&A on July 31st. And you probably catch what I'm talking about. But when I heard him say this, I listened to it a couple times because I'm kind of a nut. And then a couple days later, it finally hit me as I was sitting at work. I started thinking, like, why are there all these therapists involved and nobody's saying anything? Why are we only hearing from Seth, and why are the responses from Katie as they are? But I'm going to play you this video, and we will hopefully be able to hear it.
Active but not revealed to you.
Okay.
No, I still wouldn't be able to answer that question because that would be discussed something in the DCS records that are not in the file.
Yeah, I think that's something me and a lot of the other creators have went over and read, and I didn't see that anywhere factually that was put out in public. So if it's not put out, it'll either come out later on if this goes through, or it's just something Seth cannot answer. And we don't know. None of us creators know. I'm going to reiterate this. none of us creators have seen, not Betty, not me, not Justin, not nobody has saw these DCS papers. We don't know what's in them.
Freedom hasn't, Jen hasn't.
No, God, no.
I
I wouldn't.
have.
I mean, no. If we're good people, we're going to tell you not to do that, right? We're going to be like, even if. I mean, no. Hell, no. Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So it looks like Rosebud has a follow-up question. She says, so in my understanding, you knew he was getting help to deal with the CA trauma, the California trauma. But during all that, COS reports were active but not revealed to you.
Correct. The DCS reports were, like I said, the only reason I knew about the first one was because the SRO for that school had called me, and I had to have a meeting with him, and I had a conversation with him for about 45 minutes, and then, without anybody else around, he actually pulled everybody in individually and spoke to us. And that's the only reason I know anything about the first DCS report.
And that was in California, right? That was in, yes.
No,
So that,
the first DCS report here in Tennessee.
oh, in Tennessee, okay, just to
Is
clarify.
is because the SRO officer reached out and called me. They had my phone number. So he called me to the school and spoke to me about what Sebastian stated. And I told him what happened in California.
Gotcha.
No, I still wouldn't be able to answer that question because that would be discussing something in the DCS records that are not in the file.
Yeah, I think that's something me and a lot of the other creators have went over and read, and I didn't see that anywhere factually that was put out in public. So if it's not put out, it'll either come out later on if this goes through, or it's just something Seth cannot answer. And we don't know. None of us creators know. I'm going to reiterate this. None of us creators have seen, not Betty, not me, not Justin, not nobody has saw these DCS papers. We don't know what's in them.
Freedom hasn't, Jen hasn't.
No, God, no.
I
wouldn't.
have.
I mean, no. If we're good people, we're going to tell you not to do that, right? We're going to be like, even if. I mean, no. Hell, no. Sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So it looks like Rosebud has a follow-up question. She says, so in my understanding, you knew he was getting help to deal with the CA trauma, the California trauma. But during all that, COS reports were active but not revealed to you.
Correct. The DCS reports were, like I said, the only reason I knew about the first one was because the SRO for that school had called me, and I had to have a meeting with him, and I had a conversation with him for about 45 minutes, and then, without anybody else around, he actually pulled everybody in individually and spoke to us. And that's the only reason I know anything about the first DCS report.
And that was in California, right? That was in, yes.
No,
So that,
the first DCS report here in Tennessee.
oh, in Tennessee, okay, just to
Is
clarify.
is because the SRO officer reached out and called me. They had my phone number. So he called me to the school and spoke to me about what Sebastian stated. And I told him what happened in California.
Was everybody able to hear that without an echo? Sorry about that. I didn't realize I still had my mic on. Okay, so like I said, once I heard him say that, and all of those ladies that sat up on his panel just took it. Oh, okay, yep. And then they said in California, and you could tell everybody's confused. Nobody knows what's going on here. And I thought, well, at least I'm not the only one. So then a couple days later, like I said, it took me a couple days to percolate that and think about, like, there's an awful big void in this information. And I started just noodling through, like, he's seeing all of these, like these therapists, and he's got a neurologist. And I mean, there is a whole list of people that this child is around all the time, whether it be teachers or doctors or neurologists and therapists and psychologists, you name it. Why is there such a big void in that information? And you would think that if the trauma from California is at the forefront, that when Seth is supposedly taking Sebastian to these appointments, that there would be some type of discussion. And he just keeps saying, I don't know, they didn't tell me, and, I talked to him about this or that, and then, and I thought, well, I guess that kind of makes sense, because when we ask questions about Sebastian, we get a response about Seth, right? So maybe those questions just don't come easy to him, because it would actually be about Sebastian. But anyway, I shouldn't have said that. That's not very nice, but it is what it is. So, so my working theory, and this is just a theory, this is just me like piecing things together and looking at what's missing and the why, and, so I have this, you don't have to agree with me. It's not fact. It's just my guess. And this is just what it looks like to me. So, about how the 2022 DCS reports possibly evolved. So before I go through this, I want to be very clear. I'm not questioning whether Sebastian experienced trauma in California. What first sent me down this road was Katie's reaction, like I said. Like, why did she seem frustrated and keep asking why this old incident was being brought up again? Then I noticed another gap, which we just talked about. It was kind of like, at the time, Seth repeatedly describes himself as the person telling the schools and the doctors and the counselors and eventually the public. I mean, we all know we should not know these things. It should not be in the complaint. The judge should not see these things either. I think it was put in there for shock value. It shocks the conscience. And I think that we're all in agreement that we should not know these things. So, but, and I'm thinking, okay, well, we keep hearing about Seth, going to the doctors, and he has to be the one to tell them the information. And, so I just kind of kept going down this rabbit hole. And of course, here comes the spreadsheet, got to haul that out again. So, so it made me wonder whether these reports began with new disclosures from Sebastian, or whether the same historical incident just kept being reintroduced by an adult, which, causing professionals to report it again. And I don't know the answer, but that is finally what made the confusing pieces kind of connect for me. So we don't know what happened at school. We know it's in the complaint. They told us, what Sebastian's behavior was at school. The things that he was saying or doing that may or may not have been a little bit offensive, that could have actually caused a call to the parents. But so my theory kind of begins with the possibility that something occurred at school that caused the SRO, as Seth mentioned, or another school professional to contact Sebastian's parents. So we don't know exactly what happened. The complaints are vague, and whatever brought the parents to the school may be private and none of our business, and I believe that. However, the reason for that initial meeting matters, because when we were trying to understand how the California incident became the subject of a Tennessee DCS report, we need, we kind of have to understand a little bit of this. I don't want to know the details, but I'm just trying to find the root of it. So according to Seth, all three parents were contacted. So in Seth's Q&A, he appears to say that the school contacted all three parents and that they were all brought in and spoken with separately. So that is important because it conflicts, at least on the surface, with the broader claims that Seth knew nothing about what was happening. According to his own account, he knew about this particular situation because the school contacted him. The complaint's account also reportedly indicates that DCS eventually spoke with all three parents, including Seth. So Seth says he told the SRO about California. So during his private conversation with that SRO, he explained what had happened to Sebastian in California. So that creates an important unanswered question. Did Sebastian independently disclose the California incident at school, or did Seth introduce that history after the parents were called in concerning something else? So, and I don't know the answer to that, but that's just kind of where my brain went. But, you know, the distinction matters because it could substantially change how we understand the origin of the DCS referral, right? So the school professional may have been required to report it. So once a school professional heard information involving possible childhood SA, that person may have felt legally obligated to report it, even if the incident was historical. You know, it happened in another state, it involved another child, which we should not know that child's name. It could be in their report, but it shouldn't be in a complaint. Just saying. So therefore, you know, like the sequence could have been an incident statement, a behavioral concern, school contacted the parents, SRO, Seth told the SRO about the California incident, and then here comes DCS, right? So that is the only one possible sequence that I can think of, but it appears consistent with at least some of the available information that we have. So some of the other discrepancies that kind of throw me off is the complaint reportedly said that Sebastian placed the incident when he was approximately 10 to 12 years old. Katie reportedly told DCS that Sebastian was 8 when it happened. So that's a little strange. So and that was actually what Seth said in the beginning, was that the child was 13 and Sebastian was 7 or 8. So the closing information reportedly characterized it as child-on-child conduct involving children of the same age. So when Seth decided to disclose this to the general public, Katie responded, and how? She responded on Facebook. And she said the child was not 13, although she did not publicly provide an age. Which it's none of our business, but it lends to the fact that we have some inconsistencies here. So those variations kind of leave several unresolved questions, like how old was Sebastian? How old was the other child? Were the children approximately the same age? Was Sebastian uncertain about the timing? You know, did the public version of the story change over time? We don't know. These discrepancies, they don't prove that the underlying incident did not happen. They do show that we should be careful about treating every later description as an established fact. So Seth, he repeatedly appears to be the person introducing the California story, like I said. So across Seth's various accounts, a pattern seems to emerge, and I'm all about patterns and spreadsheets. So he says he told, the SRO at one point there was, he told the medical or mental health professionals who supposedly did not know about it. He criticized professionals for not being properly qualified to address the trauma. He says Katie became upset when he disclosed it. We know how she responded to the DCS worker. And he later disclosed the incident publicly and then provided information that Katie actually disputed. So the common denominator appears to be Seth, repeatedly introducing Sebastian's California trauma to new adults and institutions and eventually the public. So that doesn't automatically mean Seth had, improper motives. He may have believed he was advocating for his son and ensuring that professionals understood Sebastian's history, but it does raise the question of whether the repeated disclosures were helping Sebastian or whether they could have made it more difficult for him to move beyond the incident. So, and so then we go back to the complaint and the DCS materials that they quoted in there. The the complaint says that Sebastian did not want to discuss the incident. He felt humiliated and was concerned about Chris being upset that he was discussing it again. And those statements can be interpreted in several ways. They could mean Sebastian feared Chris, but they could also mean he was embarrassed by the subject. He didn't want another investigation. He believed it was private. He was tired of repeatedly being questioned. And maybe he was concerned about conflict among adults. Or, he wanted to maybe control who and whom he discussed his trauma with, because if he's saying, hey, my mom's the only other adult that knows about this other than you, that kind of gives me the impression that he was saying, hey, this is between you and me. Let's not talk about this. It's between you and me, and you're a special person because you're the second one to know other than my mom, right? I mean, that's just kind of where my head went. So, but Seth, says he knew about it, personally explained it to the SRO, therapists, doctors. Like Katie was the only one who knew, but yet Seth, he knew about it because obviously he's been telling everybody under the sun. So, maybe Sebastian actually meant something a little narrower than what the complaint suggests. And we don't know, some of these things could have been taken directly from the DCS report. Some of it could be an inference. We do know that the story kind of flexes a little bit here and there. So, without seeing the exhibits and whatnot, we don't know. But, maybe it was just the adults' later accounts just don't accurately reflect the sequence. We don't know. We don't have enough context to choose among, the possibilities of what was happening there. So, but, I want to make sure everybody's still doing okay. Everybody can hear me. So, the absence from the complaint is not proof that nothing happened, but this limitation is important. A civil complaint is not a complete medical, educational, or DCS records, and the attorneys may have omitted information, and confidential reports may exist that the public has never seen, and we should hopefully never see those. But we cannot conclude that no professional ever raised a concern merely because the complaint doesn't mention it. But for me, it was kind of why are we mentioning, kind of like a DCS report, kind of like the alpha and the omega. We got one here and we got one at the end, but we don't have anything in between. And with all of those people involved, which also takes me to, if Sebastian was not talking about it, maybe he was working through it and it wasn't something that is on his mind all the time. But it seems like whenever something happens, this seems to be brought back up in his world, and it just could be opening old wounds. And I'm not a psychologist, I don't know, but it just keeps taking me around to that. Like Katie's saying, why is this being brought up again? Chris, Sebastian had a fear that Chris was going to be upset about it again. And Seth is saying, they didn't even know about it. This person didn't know about it. I had to keep telling, maybe you shouldn't be repeating the story. Maybe your son is dealing with it in a different way. Maybe when he walks into the door, he doesn't want everybody to say, so we know what happened in California. Do you want to talk about it? I mean, I'm just guessing. So, Seth attended appointments and interacted with Sebastian's providers, so why is DCS presented as the institution uniquely responsible for his lack of knowledge? There's a therapist, there's doctors. I mean, all of these people would have this information, but he's putting it all on DCS. And that's just a question that I think is fair to ask. He put this out there for us to read and analyze, and hopefully we don't get a lot of detail moving forward. I don't know what this attorney was thinking, but it's not good. However, I did notice that in the last month or so, there's been this big scramble with content creators, especially to claim we don't have the DCS reports, we've never had them, we've never read them, they're not in my possession. So I think that there's this big scramble right now to make sure that nobody is caught red-handed with these reports. And if the only way that the details of this trauma could get out would be by filing a complaint, then that may be the route that we took. I don't know. So, but you know, Katie's frustration, you know, that to me that was telling. You know, when she was upset that it got brought up again, and it seems like when that happened there was like a scramble, and maybe she already had everything planned, but it seemed like as soon as this got brought up again, all of a sudden Sebastian's in therapy 3 times a week, and then Seth said somebody's coming to their house 2 days a week, and they have all of these things, he's getting ready for ABA. I mean, there's just like this list of all these things that Sebastian is involved in or getting involved in, and I just wonder if this being brought up over and over is causing them to have to like do some re-entry into different types of therapy for him. I don't, you know, like I said, I'm guessing, but I'm just, you know, I have kids, so I would just think, you know, like as a parent, how do you handle that, and what is the best? And if this child is he's obviously acting out, we saw it, we've heard about it, but maybe there was no connection between those two things. We don't know, thankfully. It could have just been something that he was wired to do. You know, maybe he's just got a potty mouth. We don't know. You know, maybe it has nothing to do with California. And one other thing that I noticed is that Seth has reportedly referred to Sebastian as autistic in stories dating back years, including events in California. However, the public understanding has been that Sebastian received an autism diagnosis much closer to the time of his disappearance. Now, that could have several explanations. You know, maybe Sebastian may have been suspected of having autism. He may be describing earlier events using a diagnosis learned later. I don't know. But I do know that he has repeatedly said, you know, like he even chewed out a doctor who didn't have the credentials to deal with somebody, you know, this child who had autism. And then he even spoke of when he was in California, he was outside with one of the neighbors, and one of the police officers pulled up for whatever reason, and he said, "Oh, you don't remember me, do you? I'm the dad who has the autistic child or autistic son." And I thought, that would have been a long time ago. That wasn't in 2023. So, you know, it doesn't really necessarily prove that anyone lied, but it's another example of why the timeline needs some clarification before the different accounts can, like, confidently be connected, you know? So, so the central question is not whether Sebastian's trauma was real or whether he deserved support. Of course he deserved appropriate support. The question is, did the 2022 Tennessee DCS report begin because Sebastian independently disclosed an ongoing concern, or did an unrelated school situation lead to a parent meeting during which Seth reintroduced the historical CA incident, the California incident, you know, causing a mandated reporter to call DCS? And after that, did the report uncover a present danger, or did it document that to close a historical child-on-child incident that had already been addressed? So, you know, the publicly available portions of the complaints do not answer these questions clearly, and that missing context may be why the timeline just seems so confusing. So that is a lot. I have a couple other things that I could just tell you about. If you guys are just hanging in there. Let me see if I had a couple other things here that one of the things that really concerns me, amongst many other, is that I noticed in the timeline specifics, I gotta find it, I have it highlighted here. I had notes for you guys, I promise. One of the things that really broke my heart is that the intake documented that that Sebastian felt disgusted with himself and was having increasing difficulty pretending the prior abuse had not happened. And, and that kind of makes me wonder, that really makes me wonder if it was just like he just can't get away from it. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to point out is in the complaint, I know there's this big thing about, the Title 4E candidacy, and they're claiming that Sebastian, he qualified for this program and he was at serious or imminent risk of removal from their home. Okay, so what I would like to point out here is that the school professionals got involved on September 28th. And that's when the call went into DCS. Now, as that's kind of swirling through the system, on September 29th, DCS determined that he met the criteria for this Title 4E candidacy. Now, that would have been the day after this call went in, right? And, so the caseworker kicks right in, and, they're doing their investigations behind the scenes, and then they go to, they start to interview the Proudfoots and purportedly Seth. So I'm wondering if that Title 4E candidacy was put in place because they don't know really what they're dealing with, right? So they get this report, they're hearing all these things like, there's corporal punishment and there's an essay. And by the way the complaint is written, it looks like there was ongoing essay in the house, and that's not correct. The way that they wrote it is awful. They should have clarified that that was not part of the ongoing complaint, but the way it's written is just not, there's reasons for commas, people. But anyway, so I'm wondering if, they put in this Title IV candidacy right away, just in case they walked into something that they didn't know what, what if they walked in there and the child had bruises on them or whatever? That may have been the reason why they put that in place as a, hey, just in case, we're going to put this in place because if you go in there and we have to latch onto this kid and pull him out of that house right away, at least we have the program in place. We know he's approved for the, for the program and the funding and whatever it's going to take to get him safe. That was put in place before they even talked to the parents. And I think it just kind of filtered through. And then when they had the other report in May of 2023 is when the Title IV got removed from, it said that he didn't qualify anymore. But I just want to point out that that was put in place right away, and I think it was precautionary. That's my opinion. I think it was precautionary. Another thing that just really bothers me is that in the complaint, I gotta find it now. I'm not going to read these complaints out loud, so that's why I'm kind of fumbling around here. I'm sorry, guys, but these are ridiculous, and these things should not even be in here, so I'm not going to read it. So in the complaint, it says DCS's failure to conduct a minimally adequate investigation was compounded by its complete failure to involve Rogers. Okay, so then skipping down a little bit, paragraph 15, if anybody, or 50, if anybody has it. Had DCS fulfilled this most basic obligation, it would have learned critical information that was never captured in a case file. Rogers would have told DCS investigators that Sebastian had expressed to him on multiple occasions that he was more comfortable with Rogers than Proudfoot, and Sebastian was afraid of Proudfoot because he believed Proudfoot would hurt him if he disclosed what had been happening. Okay, so what had been happening? So Rogers would have informed DCS that Proudfoot had ridiculed Sebastian about his prior essay, compounding Sebastian's existing trauma and making Sebastian even less likely to disclose abuse to any adult he believed would report back to the Proudfoot household. Well, we didn't have to worry about Sebastian not disclosing it because he had Seth. So Rogers would have further told DCS that Katie had spoken to him on multiple occasions in terms that evidenced her frustration and hostility towards Sebastian, telling Rogers repeatedly how fed up she was with Sebastian for his ongoing incidents of soiling, wetting him. Okay, we don't need to know that stuff. So Rogers would have advised DCS, and there's this whole list, this plethora of all these things that Mr. Rogers would have told DCS had they contacted him. Okay, so if the therapist didn't report Sebastian's deterioration, and Seth didn't know, oh, well, yeah, actually, it says in here, a minimally competent investigator would have recognized Sebastian's worsening condition not as a fixed background fact, but as a contemporaneous warning sign that something in Sebastian's living environment was causing him active harm. DCS was not involved in this child's life 3 or 4 times a week or every other weekend. Okay? So if the therapist didn't report Sebastian's deterioration and Seth didn't notice it enough to be alarmed, how would DCS know Sebastian's baseline behavior and know he was deteriorating based on the handful of minutes they spoke to him over a couple of years? I mean, if Seth knew all of these things, did he contact DCS himself? That's a question that the defense will most likely ask. So I think I want to stop there. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you. I have a lot that I will continue to go through, hopefully over the next, I'll try to, maybe do an hour or 2 here or there, but I do have a lot of information that I have dove into. Like I said, I pulled the DCS policies. I have better explanation of, what all of these acronyms are, and a little more of an explanation of what the complaint against Sumner County is. So anyway, thank you for hanging in there with me. This has definitely been nerve-wracking, and I know that I was rambling and I was messing with the sound, but hopefully we made it through okay. And if we disconnect, if I end stream and you don't actually hear me yelling at the dogs, then I know I'm successful, right? So that means we'll be coming to an end. So anyway, thank you for hanging out with me, and I'm actually probably going to do some more, maybe even tomorrow night, depends on if I have to work tomorrow. So I've just been compiling a lot of information, and some of these things I talked about tonight I'll go into a little more in depth. I just was trying to get through the first one without getting struck, so that would also be a success for me. So again, thank you everybody, have a good night, and I will hopefully see you again maybe tomorrow.